this is your first time with us, what we do is we like to do a recap of each episode before we dive into properly discussing it, theory crafting and everything. So we cut that recap out of our typical podcast and we rehost that just as a recap. So if you find yourself on that video, thanks for checking us out. And if you're interested in the full discussion, we will link that below. But yeah, do you want to get us started today, my friend, with episode 22 of Critical Role?
Yeah. So what happened on episode 22 of campaign 3 of Critical Role? This episode was called Promise and Potential. And the episode, the party's basically making their way back to Jassar from the adventure in the Heartmoor in basically robbing the esteemed Hydroga and some of the important documents that they've stolen from him as well. So the party makes it back to Jassar, and they decide to effectively, they have a couple things in mind. They're thinking, first of all, we're exhausted. We've been traveling. We need to get some sleep. So they decide to head to the Spire by Fire and kind of lavish themselves a little bit. So they get a couple of rooms. Chetney, they kind of joke with Chetney. I'm like, are you getting a separate room again? And he's like, no, I'm not. He's like, just get 2 rooms. So they get a couple rooms. I'm pretty sure they have drinks and food delivered to their room also, if I remember correctly. And the party basically, they just kind of enjoy some much needed rest after this kind of crazy adventure that they've just been on. And what's interesting is that night, Ashton has some memories, some dreams of really the heist that we've originally been clued into, of whenever him and the nobodies broke into Gianna Hexam's estate. And it's very unsettling. It's not necessarily new information, but he's having these images and kind of, because they're about to go see her and visit her in the morning, and he's really just remembering, that all happened to me. That was kind of traumatic, but I haven't really thought much about it, I guess. And actually, this is going to be a running theme, actually. Once they get to Gianna's place, he's going to remember some things, which we'll get into in a second. But party wakes up in the morning. They head to Hexam's estate. And Ashton also there's quite a bit of time spent in this first half on really kind of coaching the party on how to interact with her, and is being a bit... not so much in the sense of like, don't offend her, but in terms of like, hey, this person's a bit more dangerous than maybe you've realized. And so he's like, absolutely do not steal from her, Fern. And Fern's like, oh, I just borrow things long term. And he's like, seriously, do not steal from her. And if you do, just don't get caught. And he also mentions that, some people are genuinely nice, and then other people, they basically play nice. It's more of like I don't know if like a political tool is the right way to phrase it, but it's basically like, not that she's being disingenuous, but just know that if she's being kind, she's being very intentionally kind, and you don't want to do something that gives her a reason not to be. So, like I said, pretty much coaches the party on how to interact with her. The party goes to her estate. They enter in, and it's kind of like a bit of a mysterious place, not well lit, but they hear this violin music playing from the second floor. And I think there was a joke in there, maybe from Laudna or someone who's like, beware these sentient instruments that are, playing in the hall. But there were no like self-playing instruments. They actually go up to the second floor to see Hexam playing the violin, and she's playing this piece and totally ignores the party, by the way. I mean, she's really purposely focused on this piece. And there's also this older woman who's kind of watching and listening, and it's a beautifully played piece, and it's quiet as they wait. And then finally, as the song ends, this woman approaches Hexam and basically says, well done. Here's your homework for our next lesson, and gives her a couple more pieces. That person leaves. I think it's Fern, I believe, who's like, hey, do you give lessons? And she's like, yeah, speak to Hexam for my business information. And I think her name was Dinah or Dina. I can't quite remember, but
I think so.
Hexam basically says that that was a renowned, celebrated musician in Dressar who's now retired and is giving her private lessons on the violin. And that really in the last year is when she kind of picked up the violin. And I think FCG makes a comment around the effect of like, yeah, you're getting pretty good at that. And she makes kind of a semi-curious remark on like how she can really likes to focus in on things. Not even phrasing it right, but kind of is a bit of an unsettling response that you're like, okay, cool. You're very intense. Well, so she's immediately like, okay, give me the good news. I know you were successful. What happened? And the party immediately shows her the stack of papers that, if you recall, revealed that much of Hydroga's museum were fakes. So she loves reading through that. She's like, "Oh yes, our circles will have so much fun with this." And the party also, they don't do it necessarily in front of her, but they've also, even in thinking about their trip, sort of joke and talk about getting like a card for the verdict, the other group, and like maybe buying them some flowers and like, "Sorry, we set you on fire," like stuff like that. But and I actually did forget that when they were at the inn, as they were reflecting, Orm shares a little bit about what he knows about the spiraling shin and the grim verity as well. So that's another small detail. But anyway, the party, they're talking to Hexam, and she's like, "Well, you've done what I've asked you to. Here's your 3,500 gold, and here's also on top of it a satchel of rubies and gems worth about 1,000 gold." And she's basically like, "Well done." And Fern basically is like, "Oh, don't forget the statue that I told you I wanted down in the entryway of the estate." And Hexam, she sort of says it half seriously, or it seems half serious. And Hexam's like, "Yeah, in fact, if you can take it out with you, you can have it." So she's like, "Okay, great." So their party's actually leaving to go do that. And Ashton basically asks like, "Hey, we're square now, right? Like we're totally covered." And Hexam sort of hesitantly is basically like, "I have so much more work I could give you guys. But yeah, all things considered, we're square. Deal's done." And so she sort of frees Ashton from his jobs with her. But she has one request. She does ask if she could have a moment alone with FCG, which, remember, if you've been watching all the episodes, people are really taken in by FCG and curious about him. So Ashton basically says like, "Yeah, you can have that conversation with him, with FCG, if I can sit in on it." So the party basically leaves, and they spend the rest of that section basically trying to figure out how to lift this statue, which they're doing all sorts of things. They try like magic. They try, asking the statue like, "Get up and make yourself lighter." And it's like, it's a statue. But basically back in the private office, Ashton is watching as FCG and Hexam are having this conversation where Hexam's basically asking, "Where did you come from? Who made you?" And FCG's like, "Well, Dancer made me." And Hexam's like, "I've never heard of a Dancer." And is at one point like actually like grabs his head and is like looking at all like the bolts and hinges and making FCG very uncomfortable, to the point where FCG is like, "You probably shouldn't really do that." If you want, I can teach you how to like, be polite and have conversations. And Hexam's like, "Are you asking me on a date?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't think I am." But anyway, while this is happening, Ashton's also looking around the office, and he's remembering moments from the heist from before. And he even notices this crate in the corner of her office that is very similar to a crate that he has an image of from that night that he got injured, which will come up later in the episode. All this to say, Hexam basically has two requests of the FCG. First, Hexam asks, "Hey, if you, or there's two things that happen here." Basically says, "Hey, if you come across any other automaton like yourself, would you be willing to send them to me?" And he's kind of like, "Maybe. I potentially guess so. It's possible." And Hexam again points out that how rare FCG is, and how most automaton do very simple tasks. They're not sentient like FCG is. And then FCG in return asks, "Do you know where I could find people like Dancer who build things like me?" And she says, "Well, I don't want to give you necessarily like my confidential sources, but there's people all over. In fact, if you go to any major city, you'll probably find people." So they leave. The party decides to effectively they need to go check out Lord Estros and talk to him. But as they're sort of leaving the manor, Ashton goes over to the large statue. He rolls a 23 for strength and literally just like picks it up, and like there's no issue whatsoever. So they get on the gondola to head back toward Esteros's manor. Ashton's definitely he's having these memories of the heist, and he's visibly upset about it. And FCG and Imogen offer, hey, if you want, we could detect thoughts and do a little mind meld and kind of see what happened there. He flips a coin. He's like, all right, screw it. Let's do it. But maybe later tonight, like when the day's over, rather than like right this second. So they agree to that. And then they also talk to FCG some more about like, you know, man, people really like you. Like they're really taken by you. And they all kind of throw out ideas for what could be happening there. Laudna, I'm mentioning this because I've said it here in case it happens. Laudna says maybe you are a dead person, like a soul who's been inserted into this automaton body. And FCG kind of nervously laughs. But FCG basically says, yeah, my memory only goes back about 3 or 4 years. That's when I kind of like woke up, and Dancer worked on me little by little until I became, you know, a full functioning part of the troupe, until they were all like totally murdered and obliterated. And also mentions that they were hired by I think it was the Raya family.
Yeah, I think so.
And the same family had paid Ashton to sort of figure out where did our group go.
Right.
So anyway, they head to Esteros's manor. They walk in on him basically having like a training session. He's like, you know, doing a physical workout with like a target dummy, I guess.
He's so cool.
Yeah, he's so cool. And he, I think it was like his cane like doubled as like a weapon of some kind.
Yeah,
or he
I
had
think
like
so.
a scythe or something. It was really cool. But they're like, hey, we were ready to tell you about all the crazy stuff that happened. And he's like, oh, well, I have some things to tell you about as well.
Ooh.
And that's where we go to break. So you want to take it from there?
Yeah, so I'll pick up there, and we come back from break, obviously, and we basically pick up with Estros and the party filling each other in on what's happened in the absence between them. So the first thing Estros says is that, you know, Lady Emoth, whom they captured, they got all this testimony out of her that basically pinpointed Armand Tresci as a conspirator, and because of that, he has gone on the run. And if you recall, the party's efforts at the ball to get this like tracking device on him was the whole purpose of them going. Estros has been using that to track him, and up until I think a couple days ago, he'd been moving around, but now he has left the city. And through another source of Estros's, he found out that the rumor is he is heading to Basuras. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Basuras, which is, I think, where the Paragon's Call is headquartered as well. So apparently He is like ducked off, tail between his legs, to go regroup there. And which it's a pretty far away. So Estros is like, if you're interested in, you know, pursuing this, you can use my airship. It's back in port, and you know, it can get you there. And he lets him know that the airship has actually returned from its previous journey of ferrying Bertrand's body to Whitestone. And excuse me, he tells them that, and actually hands them a letter which came with, not with the body because they left the body, but it came with the return trip. And so he hands it to the party, and they basically elect Imogen to read it because, as it turns out, the letter is from Vexalia, who was, you know, Laura's character.
Vexalia de Rolo, by the way.
Right. That's right. Spoilers.
Yeah, what's up with that?
So she does her best Vexalia impression and reads the letter. It's a really cool moment. But essentially just, you know, thanks Bell's Hells for taking care of it, and, you know, had really actually a lot of kind words about Bertrand, and of course was signed Lady Vexalia. So they think that's really cool, and you know, Orum's like, you sound just like her, and everyone in the cast is like, oh, like you knew Lady Vexalia, and he's like, no, you know, I was just in the room sometimes when she was there. So they have that little moment, and then Estros basically hands them a new map, which is a large map of basically like the whole Hellcatch Valley and Basuras. Am I saying that right? Basuras?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Area. And so they are, you know, super excited, and Matt actually physically hands them a map as well. So they're really giddy about looking at that. And Estros points out like these different subterranean tunnels that are on the map. He says they're like sinkholes that lead to this subterranean like
Right.
webbing, and that's one of the reasons it's called the Hungry Valley, is because people get sunk up in there.
There were a couple of really cool landmarks on the map.
Yeah, there was like the Troll Ferry, I think, was one of them, and just a lot of really interesting, cool things. I haven't looked yet, but I'm wondering if anybody, not to get off subject here, but like tweeted out an HD picture of it yet, because I really want to like take a good look at it myself.
Yeah.
But anyway, he hands him the map, and he's basically like, if you want to be a part of this, go get him, bring him back here so he can face justice. And they're like, well, what if we kill him? And he's like, well, bring the body back. And I think FCG asks about the Green Seekers. They're like, are they involved in this? Are they headed there? And Estros says he hasn't really spoken to them, so he's not really sure where they are in the grand scheme of things, but that almost certainly they are still on this investigation. So perhaps they're headed there, perhaps they're there. He's not sure. Estros then gives them the tracker for Armand so that if they do make it there, they can use it to hopefully find him. He says it's got a couple mile range, and if he is in range, a light will basically point toward the direction you need to go to get to where he is. And he also reveals that it's been about a week since he lost the signal on this tracking device. So then he gives them a quick history lesson on the area in the Hellcatch Valley that they're going to, and he says there's a lot of different factions there that think they're in charge. The military keeps kind of a loose rule, and it's basically really shady. Like if you see somebody that looks shady, they probably are, so keep an eye out. And FCG chimes in and recalls that they were actually made in Bassaras, and that the attack on his family, for lack of a better word, basically happened in that area of the world.
Right.
So finally the party is like, they all caught each other up on the information, and they are going to take him up on this. They're going to use the airships. They're like, okay, let's make our final arrangements before we head out. And one last thing they ask of Estros, though, is like, will you make us some baked goods for the journey? And he's like, Evelyn, go to the market. For tonight we bake.
Yeah, get my tools.
So they part ways, and next up they are going to go to the Dial Hall, which is because of Chetney, who wants to speak with Ajit Dial, who Gurge pointed him in that direction. So they head there, and this is basically like a really cool like university type feel. There's lots of like kids studying and lectures happening. Very studious environment. So they walk in, and there's a couple of guards, and Chetney approaches and like, I'm here to speak to Mr. Dial, and he basically rolls terribly, and the guard just essentially ignores him. He's like, okay, cool, buddy. So then Imogen steps up, and she tries and mentions, hey, we're here because Headmaster Grease, told us to come talk to him, and she rolls well enough that the guard does go and get Ajit. So he arrives, they do their introductions, and they say they work for Estros, and he's kind of caught off guard by this, be like, oh, really? Like he's not like off put by it, but he's like, I thought he was a loner. So the party was like, should we not have said that?
Yeah, right.
But then they're like, you mind if we actually speak in private? And so they go to his office, and basically Chetney explains his connection to Gurge, and that he too shares the same affliction that Gurge has, and that he's basically here to find out more about the Gorgini. And Ajit explains that, yeah, he met Gurge because Gurge and the Gorgini saved him and his wife from this jungle monster that attacked them, and they've basically been friends ever since. They kind of had this relationship where Ajit would help them get different supplies they may have needed and couldn't get a hold of themselves, since they kind of live out of society. But eventually Gurge, split from the group, which we knew that. And yeah, that he hasn't really talked much to him since. But Chetney's like, great, yeah, could you possibly get me an introduction with the Gorgini, because I'm trying to learn more about my affliction, yada, yada, yada. And Ajit's like, we could, there are cures. We could cure you if that's what you're looking for.
Right.
And Chetney's like, no, like, I'm not.
Travis is like, no way. After all this time, no.
No. I still am like, he made something about like, I want to understand my own existence first,
it's important
or
to
something.
know who you are before. Something like that.
So he says that doesn't interest him now, but he still wants to meet them because they are like the one group that seemingly has somewhat of a control over their affliction, because werewolves are known to like lose control, kill people, attack, eat indiscriminately, except for the Gorgini. They seem to, like I said, have some measure of control. So that's why he's interested. And while they're talking about losing control and stuff, the party is like, Chet, have you ever lost control? Like, have you ever had one of these moments? And he says, no, of course not. But with a little pushing, they're like, there are some times when maybe like I don't remember what happened. And they do a little bit later, but bring up how he attacked Orem when they were doing the museum heist. And basically they boil it down to, he was in danger, his health was really low, and the beast takes over in those instances. So the group's like, all right, noted. Let's watch out for that, see if we can figure out some stuff from it. But back to the main discussion, the Gorgini. Ajit basically tells them that they've moved to the place called the Gloom Jungles because they didn't really fare too well in the open desert area. So they've gone there, and the best way to probably get in touch with them, and this is at least what Gurge did, was he left the city, would go out into the wilderness where they were, and just howl as loud as he could at the moon, like when the moon touched the mountains or something like that. And then they would come and find you. But he's like, be wary, because other things are in the jungle and might hear you howl. So hopefully the Gorgini get to you first. But that's your best bet for finding them. So he thanks them for all the information, and they do briefly ask him about Ruidus and Ruidus-born people, since he's like a scholarly guy. And Ajit is familiar with the superstitions, but he basically thinks they're just that, superstitions, right, and like excuses, like instead of taking responsibility, just being like, oh, it was the moon's fault, I was born under the moon. Yeah. So he thinks it's kind of hogwash in that way.
Yeah.
But so everyone really likes him, by the way. They even do an insight check. They're like, man, I hope he's not like secretly a douchebag. But everyone likes him, and they basically conclude their business there.
There was an insight check where he basically says, and if you come across them, just let me know like how they're doing. And they do an insight check, and they get a whisper. I can't remember who does the insight check, but he gets a whisper about like, that was interesting. And so we don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I think it was Laura. And then we don't know what happened, so who knows? Yeah. But I feel like she laughed. So in my mind, I feel like Matt just like was like lying and is like, he's super evil. But who knows? Maybe it was the truth. But yeah, there was an insight check. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Continue.
No, you're good. So then they leave there, and the next stop is they're going to head back to the Trove of Marwa to do a little bit of shopping, but not before Laudna remembers to pick up a croissant to bring her because of their little thing they did last time. Yeah. So they get there. It is revealed that Marwa has a little pet rat named Jay, which, of course, Laudna was very excited about. They basically ask her what new magical items she has. And just a quick rundown here. She shows them a magical horn that if you blow, only the target can hear it. They've got a murder apron, which is like this butcher's bib that constantly bleeds. And it basically improves your slashing damage. I think you crit on a 19, and it never stops bleeding.
I think it let you like re-roll. Did it let you re-roll or something?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
I think you could re-roll like your damage, and you had to take the second one. It wasn't like advantage necessarily.
Yeah, really strong item.
Yeah,
really
super cool too, like just thematically. Yeah. And then she also presents them a portable hull, which if you're not familiar in D&D, it's basically kind of like a bag of holding, sort of. It's basically like an interdimensional pocket that they can carry around with them. Fern actually jumps in it, and they find out I think it's about 10 feet deep. And they, of course, are like, we have to get this. So they do a little bargaining with her and basically buy everything that I just mentioned. In addition to that, they get a couple of potions and some spell components. And
FCG's never-ending list of random things that he needs. And
got 100 pounds of silver or something.
Yeah.
So they get all of that and, say their goodbyes. And next up is Zudana's house really quickly, just to check on her. And Imogen and Laudna give her some gold, just to make sure she's still breathing. And then they head on over to the Crook house. And when they get there, Milo is asked to make a propeller for FCG for various purposes. So Milo gets on that, and while there, Ashton basically just asks Milo about the original job that he'd been thinking about all during this episode. And Milo says that we were hired, and I think it was just a vengeful smash and grab. And Ashton does an insight check on that, and he gets a whisper. Um,
Mm,
and I think
yeah.
we're basically later told, so we're not told this in this moment, but Milo too is kind of having a hazy time
Right.
remembering the events of
Yeah.
this.
There's something weird about it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got like some holes in. Excuse me, they have some holes in their memory. Um, and more information that is given here is Milo says that they were called Jeto. I have it written down and I can't remember how it's pronounced, but was heading the job, and they were after something that Milo didn't know about. Milo says it feels fuzzy, and something hit them with a wave, and everything became almost like a dream briefly, and then they just ran. They didn't realize Ashton was left behind at first. They came back, did the best they could, and here we have Ashton today. But Ashton was also, Milo says, gripping this vial in like a death grip, and Milo actually used the vial as he was just trying everything they could
Yeah.
to fix Ashton.
I like how nonchalantly I'd be like, "Yo, what you?"
Yeah, wait, what did you put in me?
Yeah.
Yeah. But so Milo gives the propeller, gets that done, and they basically leave the Crook House after that. They stop at the Soot and Swill for a quick meal, and then they head back to the Spire by Fire, and this is where FCG and Imogen decide to cast Mind Meld on Ashton to try to figure out what happened that night. So this sequence was really cool in the episode. Matt was just basically explaining these like flashes and fragments of memories that they saw as they were diving in, detecting thoughts into Ashton. And so basically it went like this. The first thing they get is this someone saying the shipments are timed. This is our only chance. And then there's a flash to just like running through the streets. And then there's a flash to a room that has these runes that all of a sudden illuminate and the instinct to run. Then there's a flash of a crate hidden off to the side. A flash to Ashton opening it with a crowbar. A woman's voice asks if they found it. Ashton reaches inside. There's like glass clinking around, and they pull out a singular glass vial of this like gray liquid, and then the runes begin to glow. Flash, and the next thing Ashton knows is that they are like flying off backwards on the balcony, just like seeing the night stars and the balcony ahead of them falling, and then darkness. The next flash, someone's yelling, "He's dead, leave him." Next flash, more running. Next flash, blurry vision, then a light, then a dark shape in the light, and then Milo coming into focus, being like, "You okay?" Like, "Oh my god, you're back." And then it ends, and they like stop the mind meld spell. So then they basically ask like, "Ashton, are you okay?" Like, and Ashton's currently under calm emotions from FCG, but FCG drops it, and Ashton immediately begins like pounding the wall, and very upset. Clearly, he says he recognizes the woman that was in the vision. It was Sally, one of the members of the Nobodies. And he's just like, some of this information was new to him. He hadn't recalled these things, and he just realizes there's a lot we don't know here. Milo also had holes in their memory. Like, I'm gonna have to go find the Nobodies and talk to them and figure out what's going on here. So the party winds down for bed after that, and one last thing that happens is Orem takes out the sending stone and contacts Dorian, and he basically tells them what they're doing, where they're headed, and that they miss him. And Dorian responds in kind, is like, "Miss you too. I have a crazy story, but I'll tell you later." And that's where the episode ends. Whew.
That is what happened in episode 22 of campaign 3 of Critical Role.